everybody. Sarah Stone from the Chevy Chase Club, and I'm very excited today to be joined by Jeff Leishman, who I consider to be a good friend and an incredible mentor to me in my career. He is a PGA Tour coach for the PGA and LPGA. He's a top 100 coach and also best in state in Florida. He has coached some pretty well-known household names on the PGA Tour, including the 2015 Rookie of the Year, Daniel Berger, and three-time tour winners, Will Mackenzie and Vaughn Taylor, and currently working with several KFT members as well. So today we're going to kind of have a little bit of a chat, an open-ended conversation. We titled it How to Get the Most Out of Your Players, and we're going to be kind of focused on some topics related to technology and teaching, collaborating and creating teams to build some coaching tools, and then basically just visiting a little bit about what he's done in his career. So please use the chat as we go through if you have some questions related to the topics we're talking about, and we're just going to have a nice time today. Thanks, Jeff.
You're welcome. Good to be here.
Jeff, do you want to give us a little history of your coaching career from, you were a competitive player and then making your way down to Jupiter, Florida from Canada?
Yeah, my wife and I moved to Jupiter, and that was back when Jupiter was not as well known as it is now. And there were jokes about, oh, is that next to Mars, or is it just the other side of Venus, that kind of thing. And now, obviously, it's become this place where it seems like you trip over tour players. I played some myself, and then I would say that probably molded how I do the job now, because I did start out by thinking more in terms of what I wish I had when I was playing, and I think that's probably at a time when team concepts or performance elements in golf were developing at the same time. Because I would say that when I shifted from playing myself in my mid to late 20s into coaching more, was about the time that Dave Phillips and Greg Rose were starting TPI and talking about the idea that there was going to be this collaborative effort between trainers, physical therapists, golf coaches, or teachers. I think the golf coach term is something that's evolved over more in the last 15 years. Before that, it was just you'd go see a golf teacher, and the format of that looked pretty similar. It was an hour lesson, and I would like to think that I've been part of a trend where it's a little bit moving away from that structure and a little more holistic, I would say.
So we met actually at a gym in Florida with David Donatucci, I think towards the end of like 2009 or 2010. And one of the things that drew me to you as a coach was the fact that you were in the gym with your players, conversing with the fitness instructor, David, and working through movement patterns with the players. And I hadn't really seen that before coming to Florida and being around it. So just to kind of talk a little bit about, you know, the relationship with David and how you kind of pick and choose the people that you want to work with and what you're doing with them related to your players.
Well, there was a conscious effort for me to recognize where I was weak in my own knowledge and not see that so much as trying to catch up, or certainly like replacing that role, but thinking about how could I learn in the process to communicate better, with the ultimate goal that the person the player you're helping improves. But the communication and then that relationship with David or people like him, trainers or physical therapists, that I was trying not to feel threatened by not knowing as much as that. And I was trying to more view it as, okay, this is a very good opportunity for me to broaden my own way of communicating about this, because I did feel like this became, I would say, somewhat of a philosophy at TPI, is that the first thing to do is to screen somebody, or to, at least in a general way, and Mike Adams has been a pioneer in this as well, that it doesn't make sense to ask a person to make a movement if they're not actually capable of doing it. And then the other part is that we have to have a reference point to possible injury, not only in the movement that we might be asking them to make, but what a little bit of what their historical injury report looks like. It's kind of a joke around when I talk to PTs now. You'll ask a general question, what does your injury look like? Oh, nothing. Well, I did fall out of a tree when I was a kid and broke both my legs. And so then there's this discussion about how that might be relevant in how they're moving now, even though they're a 45-year-old banker. So I think that these relationships, I wasn't so much looking to jam like a round peg into a square hole, as much as I think that I was just looking for people that were into collaborating as well.
And so you use fitness and chiropractors and in your advisory board and your website, but you also have a couple guys on there that are related to certain areas of the game as well, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I have a good relationship with John Graham, who has recently specialized more in putting, and then I would say that I have other coaches that are friends that I communicate with. I'd like to think that on my website that all of those are people that I communicate on a semi-regular basis, and not just a list of people that I had dinner with, maybe. Like that it's really why I love doing the job. One of the reasons why I love doing the job is that it gives me an opportunity when I do travel, and I'm not naturally an extrovert, so it's a push for me to go and do these things, to meet people. And as a result of that, I think, or I hope that I have become better at forming those relationships, as well as not always looking to find people that agree with me. I appreciate when people don't agree with me, or that we don't have a shared opinion on something.
So one of the people that you are collaborating with is John Sinclair, who's made some pretty big advancements in 3D measurement and technology with coaching. Can you just share a little bit about that relationship, and then how it's maybe really changed some of the way you teach or coach from before using Trackman? Or this is a big topic right now, is 3D motion and force generation.
Yeah, the step which both John and I are involved with now is being able to take a two-dimensional image and it being sent or recreated into a three-dimensional avatar. So that the goal is to remove the wires, or in the case of AMM, which John is very knowledgeable and still has one of the functioning systems, which is the system that a lot of the graphs that people have seen through TPI comes from. And that system is still one of the, or if not the most accurate ways to measure. It's just very cumbersome. And so I met John through the same process. He was involved with a company that had players on the PGA Tour, and one of my clients ended up signing up to have this group be part of his team. And so that relationship with John 17 years ago has evolved. I would consider John a good friend as well as my mythbuster. So to a little backstory on John, that this is one that's been told quite a few times. When John first got his Trackman, he had the ballistics expert from the Dallas-Fort Worth Police Department in his hitting bay, and they were firing golf balls through tissue paper to test the accuracy of Trackman. So he's naturally a bit of a skeptic, and he's saved me a lot of money over the years in not buying needless technology, or also allowing me to use him as a sounding board for things. And he was just here last week. We do a kind of a biannual motion capture thing where he still brings his AMM system. We were comparing the AMM data to the motion to coach data and checking for accuracy. There are some really exciting things that motion to coach is able to do now. They're very close to being very accurate in predicting launch monitor data. So John's actively involved with that, as well as TPT Shafts, the Swiss company. So that's just a good friendship that we went to Fujikura together. We were on Enzo when Enzo first started. I think we've been to Scotty Cameron together. I'm his relationship with Sasho even though Sasho lives in a very close proximity to where my wife and I have a summer home in Prince Edward Island, Canada. That helped to create a relationship that I have with Sasho. So yeah, a lot of good things have come from hanging out with John.
So the motion to coach that you brought up, and then there's sports box as well. And we're starting to see a lot of three-dimensional measurement showing up on apps and on the phone to be able to use. And I know, at least from my coaching, it seems a little unbelievable that you could be accurate from a camera standpoint. But what are some things that how do you utilize it, or what would you like? What's the biggest eye-opening information that you've gotten from using these things that's helped your coaching?
Well, I think that this is the case for 3D data and force plates and Trackman information. And initially, I've done this long enough to think back when there wasn't really a camera. I mean, there was a big thing that was on your shoulder that had a VHS tape in it that filmed, I think, at, I don't know, 30 frames per second or something. It was pretty rudimentary. So all of these are diagnostic tools. So I think sometimes people cross over into a realm that's a little bit more of a research project, and that's fine if that's the direction that you want to go. The role of the coach, as I see it, is that you're going to always be the person who's interpreting this information for the player that's standing in front of you. That your job is to, for lack of a better term, filter this and condense it down into an action plan. Because without that, you're just regurgitating information. And we've got to be careful about, first of all, the accuracy of that information. Example, these devices are becoming more and more accurate. They are great tools, but there's still flaws. So that knowing what those flaws are and looking at, like I have an example with Trackman, for example, when that first came out, there was a pretty prominent period where people were holding fast to being zeroed out. And then with a little bit more experience with some of the best players in the world, the realization was that while that was attainable in a practice situation, it wasn't really what they were doing on the golf course. They were varying paths significantly, angle of attack related to path would change significantly. So then there was a little bit more of a, whoa, let's rethink this. What is the information we're giving to the more average golfer, and what makes that more reasonable? So I think one of the big things that John and I talk about is, okay, we have this database of known information when it comes to 3D. John has, I'm trying to think of how many, he has 70 of the top 100 players maybe in his database now, or he's got a very large database. And so when you look at that database, it's not of an actual golfer, it's an accumulation of a lot of golfers, and there are a lot of outliers or outliers in movement in that, so that it would be flawed to then say this is the ideal simply because it falls within one standard deviation of this range. It's good as a reference. I'm much more into using that as a reference and then seeing whether something else matches. So if we take something that is fairly common now in terms of wrist angles at the top, so does this wrist angle where we've got a lot of extension or flexion versus extension, what goes with that? What is it that, say, that type of player does that matches that? And then we don't see things so much as flaws or right or wrong, but more that we have these connection between pieces and they're more manageable than, say, something else.
So what would, we have some ranging people here from like newer teachers to seasoned experienced golf instructors with lots of information and experience, but what could they get? Is downloading one of those a good thing to do, and then just start to utilize it in front of the student with them and start to look for preferences or matchups, or, I mean, this is where it's going. And I think some of us aren't exactly sure what to be doing with it.
I would recommend that you do a little research on the people in your area that have more experience with something like this than you, and open yourself up to learning from them. Now, I know answer is tempered by the fact that this is my style. This is the way I do it. Now, it may not be your style to do that. You may be a person that's going to lock yourself in a room and figure out, okay, I'm going to do this on my own. But I think that that is going to bring a certain amount of bias when you do that. So we take let's say we take an app like Motion to Coach, and you're going to, I think you're better off. Okay, I want to be better at using this technology. Who in my area, who in my scope of friends or known colleagues has a better reference point than I do? I'm going to go and spend time with them. And if it means compensating them for their time, that's what I would recommend doing, rather than diving it in on your own.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so much out there for coaches to look at, and lots of conversations about speed and force measurement and two-dimensional measurement. And it's just kind of giving an idea of what, like giving them an overview of what it would be. And I think what you're recommending is a good idea, to go and see some other people who are used to it. But what's the most eye-opening thing that you learned from going from two-dimensional to three-dimensional? Anything significant where you thought it was one thing and it was totally, totally different?
Well, there were a number of things. Wrist angles, for one. What looked like was going on, well, it wasn't actually going on. So even now, when John Sinclair and John, who's done this more than probably anybody in the coaching world, we look at someone's unique wrist patterns, and he's got his hands, we both got our hands like this, and we're looking at it, and we're actually like trying to figure out, based on the graph, what is really going on with this person's, and then the look of it versus the reality of what's happening. Because you can have some overall things that either look bad or look okay, but then there was a very good player that we had in the other day that had a significant opening that was going on during the downswing, which is less than ideal when you're a high-level golfer. You don't really want to be opening the club on the way down. So, but trying to determine at what point and where that was happening. And this was a conversation that was not going on when the player was there. So you're just trying to, okay, what is actually happening? We can see that based on this graph that the club is twisting open. You can look at it more closely now in two-dimensional video, because that's also what's going on at the same time, because I'm not trying to disregard, you're not going to be able to see it really with our eyes. You can see it in two-dimensional video. Yes, now, okay, that's going on. What's really happening there? And then you can build a plan to educate the player so that they have a plan to be able to do this, with also the understanding they don't really want to be thinking about any of that. They don't want to be thinking about what their hands are doing. They maybe have never thought about this before. They're already have a pretty high level of skill. So you start to open these doors. You got to be really careful about whether you've got the right key to open them, and also whether they can close them again so that they don't stay open.
How do you determine with the player that you have the information you're going to share with them? You know, because everyone's going to open and close doors differently, or some people are going to be super into tech, and some people are going to be like, I just want to feel when you're.
Yeah, and having said that, they also are maybe saying that, but that's also not maybe what's best for them. They maybe are really into that, like, oh no, I'd like to know all this, just like sitting in a doctor's office and yeah, lay the full details of the MRI on me. But is that ultimately going to be best for their performance? And being cautious about that is the first step, I think. And then also prioritizing. Like, that's the real value of a baseline of knowledge and understanding, is you got to prioritize. You're going to prioritize. Is this something that is in a cause and effect relationship? Is it more the effect rather than the cause? And that's where the experience comes in, or I'd like to think that collaboration comes in before we say something. I'm going to reach out to some other people. Have you ever seen this before? Which I know is what goes on in the medical world. I mean, at least I hope it does. Like that there's enough communication between the doctors that I know, at least that are in my family. I'm fortunate enough on my mother's side, and also on my wife's side of the family, we have some very smart doctors. And so I asked them, you know, does this go on? And they say, well, in a perfect world, you know, in less than perfect world, people get a little sort of stuck in their room, and either ego prevents that from happening, or maybe just a general misunderstanding, but really like the collaboration part of that is that I'm going to reach out to somebody. Have you seen this before? How have you dealt with this in the past? And then that's going to help me help decide how are we going to share this with this person. And then we want to be very clear about the intent, not the intent of sharing it, but like, okay, this is the timeline on this, because I think it's our obligation to be able to say to someone, like, let's say with a grip change, this is what the timeline looks like for this, and are you okay with this timeline? Are you in coaching and sometimes referred to as a buy-in? You need a level of buy-in on this. Like, are you really wanting to go down this road? And what's the bread, kind of getting the read of the room of what is the commitment there. And I think that that's also an important part of when you have a relationship with someone, that they're asking for you to help them, that you not only are diagnosing or prioritizing the thing that's going to help them through the use of technology, so you can back this up, but backing it up is part of that explanation. Like, okay, this is the thing, and historically this is going to take this long, and these are also the possible side effects, good and bad.
Yeah, and you brought up the word relationship, which is something that I admire about what you do with your coaching, is you and your player have a relationship. You set expectations and goals and priorities, like you said. And sometimes I think reading through and talking a little bit with you, you sit and spend some time with the player when they come to you and say, Jeff, I'd like to work with you on my golf swing. I have these things I'd like to be doing. Can you talk to me about like how you set that up so that they understand that this is going to be a relationship? It's not a one-off 1 hour lesson at the Dye Preserve. So I think that's a pretty interesting thing that you do as well.
Yeah, I'm fortunate enough to be in a situation where I can take my time, and I recognize that that's not the case for everybody who coaches or teaches. Like, if you're at a private facility, the requirement is a little different. I'm lucky in the sense that I can take my time to figure out whether it's going to be a good fit, and that's what's worked for me. The relationships that I have are all annual, so I've done it that way now for 15 years, and I still teach some, I would call them one-offs, but sort of hourly structure. I myself felt uncomfortable at some point in an hourly lesson structure because I felt like it was always running out of time, or that it was like had to wrap it up, or that I felt that I was mentally crossing my fingers hoping for a good one before the person left, or that all that stuff. And it felt a little bit like golf triage, to be honest. Like, how quickly can we? And I also felt like that if I had more success and I charged more per hour, the message that I was creating in that hour needed to be bigger. Like, there needed to be this thing, and I wanted it ultimately to be a way to say that everything's all right. Like, that you go to this, like, again, using the doctor analogy, you go to the doctor and it's okay to say everything's okay. You get into a situation where maybe you're always looking for something wrong when to justify why that person is there. And I just didn't want to be in that situation. So yeah, I have an interview. I try to lay out the best I can about how I do the job, and this is the reason why that I get compensated the way that I do, and I am not looking to close the deal right there. I want them to go away and think about it. And to be honest, I'm thinking about it too, because if I'm getting some bad feelings about whether what I do and what they're looking for don't align, I am, again, fortunate enough that I can choose not to be involved in that relationship.
Yeah, there's I think you said that you wanted to establish as a coach how somebody learns and then why they do what they do, which I thought was kind of a neat way to look at it, because oftentimes as teachers we just go in and try to tackle the problem and not really start to understand or be curious about why are they doing a move or a pattern the way that they are. So like, as far as communication goes with them, how do you get into that with them? How do you get into whether or not what they think they're trying to do versus what they're capable of doing is possible?
Well, that's where times, and you get better at the interview. I believe you get better at having a set of questions and then reading the answers. So going back to originally when we were talking about someone falling out of a tree and, you know, both legs were broken, and then, all right, well, that's probably pretty relevant to how you move, and your ankles are probably a little messed up. So I think with time, you then see that what they want aligns with what they're capable of, or what they whether their skills, because I think that there's a component here of not only how they move but the skills. So you say you meet, say, someone who is now regularly breaking 100, and they come in and say, well, I'd like to be regularly breaking 80. Well, part of the job is, first of all, evaluating the current skills, and then how much time they have to commit to that. And then the other part would be, is this realistic? Is it, without being overly judgmental and crushing dreams? Because in my situation, I'm meeting juniors or college players, and young professionals that have this ultimate goal. All of them say that they want to play on the PGA Tour. Okay, well, let's look at more incremental goals. And then you start to have a way of using statistics, and you start to ask certain questions about what they do. And you also then understand some of those answers because you've heard them a lot. So for me, I hear someone works hard. Okay, that's great. That's a pretty common answer. This is what I'm thinking in my head. I'm not actually saying this out loud, but I'm thinking, okay, well, that's a requirement. And that's nice that you do that, but what are you working hard at? What is it? So then I ask questions like, if I walked up to you on the driving range, what would you tell me you were working on? And then that question is maybe going to be answered differently. Someone might give me a really elaborate answer to a lot of technical information. So that gives me a clue, like how heavily weighted is this? Another player might be shot shape related. Like I'm working on getting this shape to come out, or like they may simplify it back to a draw or fade or my contact, or even more advanced answer would be I'm working on distance control. Okay, and I think that's a value. You get work on these questions even within the club's environment that are tells. They're kind of backdoor questions. Like, when was the last time you had a club fitting? Even though they're not there for a club fitting, it gives you an idea about how serious they are about getting their gear right, or what were some of the takeaways from your last lesson? You're not so interested about where that came from, but what were the takeaways? Gives you an idea of what kind of retention this person has. So those kinds of questions, I think you get better at in that first introductory meeting. I can tell in those meetings if someone comes with their parents, like let's say this is a good junior golfer and they come with their parents, and the junior is not answering any of the questions and the dad's answering all the questions. Well, I wouldn't say that's a deal breaker for me, but it's a clue. Like, okay, the ship's being run by the dad here. The junior golfer is not the one, even though I'm asking direct questions of the junior golfer. So then that might change the next few questions that I have about what is the timeline. Because for me, I see that there's an introduction of potentially of me into their golf evolution. So this golfer has come in to see me, regardless of where they are in their golf journey. And then now if I'm going to introduce myself into this timeline, I got to get an idea of what that timeline looked like. It's a little irresponsible to just jump right in there and assume that there isn't a lot of things that have happened to that point. It's a little different with a beginner, but when you've got somebody who's played golf, let's just say just your country club golfer who plays 20 times a year, and he's played for 20 years, or she has played for 20 years, there's still a timeline to that. There's a retention of some information. And if you're going to be a person who's interested in seeing that person on a more regular basis, you got to figure out several things to continue on that timeline without it being a serious redirect that the person is not ready for, or also doesn't have good consequences.
Yeah, so if you had someone come in that's like shooting 100, for example, and they want to break 80, what how do you determine if that's going to be a possibility for them? And then if it's not, what's the communication that you're going to do for them? I mean, that's more typical of what I think people sitting in our audience right now are going to be working with, right? Unrealistic goals, potentially not a lot of practice time, and wants to accelerate their learning process.
Right. Okay. So we don't want to, I think that does come down to communication. You can be brutally honest, and then that's going to elicit a certain response. Not everybody's going to respond well to brutal honesty. And so I think if you had that scenario, and let's say it's a just recently retired hockey player, that's a different scenario than your hedge fund manager that has the same expectation, has played for 20 years, and doesn't necessarily, it's not so patient with change, just using those as potential examples. The hockey player is going to have quite a few movement references, and probably that's a more realistic ask. The other one is going to take a more staggered approach. Both possibly are outcomes that could occur. The hedge fund manager might be a person who's watched too many YouTube videos and is twisted into knots, and all they need is some direction and a level of buy-in to that direction. One of the things that comes up in setting goals, I try to read as much as I can, and the thing that has stuck with me recently is that long-term goals tend to create anxiety in certain people, or a lack of focus. Short-term goals create process-oriented, or at least quantified steps. So I think the hockey player is going to be able to make these larger jumps, maybe faster, and he's going to be the better story. And then the hedge fund manager, you're going to have to buy in a little bit more on, well, let's set a short-term goal that then is a little bit more incremental getting to this place, as opposed to looking at it from 100 to 80. Like, we're going to go from break 95, and then what are the things that you get feedback from? Is this person really wanting to take the next few steps to now break 90? No, are they still a pretty bad bunker player, or that they don't really like to practice putts inside 10 feet? So, and then you have a better way of communicating to them whether it is possible or not. Like, realistically, I would say that in my experience, it is important that you're honest. You don't want to be unrealistic in your own expectations. Like, oh yeah, okay, this is going to happen. I think you're setting yourself up that if you were to do that, and your credibility is going to be affected then.
For sure. I mean, I think a lot of us get asked that by players. I've had it recently where someone's like, do you think that I can go from a 16 to a 9? And like saying, yes, of course you can, is a big expectation put on yourself and the player, and it's like determining, so what kind of skill assessments do you do necessarily? Like, for example, if the hedge fund guy came to you and said they wanted to do X, or, or do you do a skill assessment and then you do like practice time, or how often do they see, like what kind of game plan do you start to put together for somebody like that?
So before I answer that question, in your example of 16 to 9, and you were talking about the pressure on you, that pressure is going to come because you only have control over what you can do. You don't have control over what they're going to do ultimately. You can direct them, you can strongly suggest, but that anxiety or pressure is going to ultimately be there because you can't hold them accountable, really. There's so that I think with experience you get good at the initial questions, you get better at skills evaluation, you have some reference point for knowing what's good enough, and that's where PGA Tour stats come in. I just had this the other day. Someone is saying that they're a bad bunker player. Okay. How do you know that? Well, I don't get the ball up and down very often out of the bunker. Okay, well, there's two parts to that. Because if you're a really good bunker player, you're also a really good putter from 8 feet. Because if you're world class from out of the bunker, it means that you average 8 feet. And then that starts to shift their perception, and also that it was a clue that because they had that stat that they weren't good in up and down percentage from the bunker, and ultimately they weren't a good putter from 8 feet, their expectation out of the bunker was too high, which was actually putting more pressures on the decision making and making the contact need to be better. And that was actually having a negative effect on their overall execution. So unraveling that and that one aspect is part of what you need to do if someone's into these very specific goals. Like that's a big goal. This is all right, fine. You have this big goal. We want to be looking at more incremental steps to that. What do those steps look like? And then we need to have a real good evaluation of where you're at now and what it looks like to be a 9 handicap. I mean, that means that you're breaking 80 on a regular basis. What does that really mean? Like, what are your, like, if we're just looking at the 4 parts of golf, what are your tee shots like? What are your approaches like? What are you doing greenside? How many opportunities are you getting? What are your actual putting percentages look like? Now, when you start to go there, people start to go, wow, okay, this is a lot. That's a clue that probably they don't really have the buy-in for this. So when you get better at breaking it down like that and actually having something to draw upon that is real and factual, then unless the person is off their head delusional, you can make a case to, yes, this is possible and this is not possible.
Do you think that Trackman Combine is a good starting point if you're working at a club and you have someone coming to you and saying, I'd like to know if this is a possibility? I mean, just from a teacher standpoint of something you could do quickly to have a baseline?
I am much more a fan of the Trackman Pro app. So it's surprising to me how many people don't actually use that as much now. So it's because they formerly thought it either was the putting app or it was, well, for pros, it's not. I mean, it's a great way to do an evaluation of someone's shot making ability on the golf course. So you just go in there and you set up a standard 18-hole test, and you give a person 18 approach shots, and it will randomize the numbers. You can even do it for your own golf course, and you just get a sense of what is their proficiency when it comes to either strokes gained or a score, or even the number of birdie or how many greens they hit, or what, and then also what is their decision making. Like you can now give them a tuck right pin, excuse me, and what do they do on that, even if it's from 100 yards, and then that's much more effective than a combine, because that person can fake it. They're hitting multiple shots. A clue to me when I was doing the combine before, and why I didn't use it even before Trackman Pro app came out, was that better players were always better on the first shots, and they got either bored or they were less interested, and they got worse as they hit the same shot more often. Poorer players got better as they hit more shots because they got attuned to what they needed to do from that. So I started, it wasn't that I thought that it was flawed. It was just that you could also train to that test. So you could get numbers that someone was good at. So I'm much more a fan of the Trackman Pro app.
Perfect. That's great information for all of us, because I think we're always looking for a quicker way to assess, especially us that work at private clubs or busy ranges or facilities where we don't have a lot of time to have an annual relationship commitment for people. One of the questions I was asked was about practice time. Like if you have someone that's talented and dedicated to the process, let's maybe take a junior first as an example, and then maybe take the retired hedge fund guy as another example, but how would you build out a practice schedule for them? Like I know that's kind of a really detailed question maybe for you, but maybe just kind of a broad range of an idea for a high level kid, and then the average guy, girl.
Okay, so the high level kid would be much more touching on all aspects of golf. So what does tee shot look like? What does approach look like? what does their green side stuff look like, and what does their putting look like, and um, trying somewhat to have a reference to 2/3, 1/3. So if we just broke down tee shots and approaches, that would be 1/3, and then the other 2/3 would be what are you doing green side, having some block and some random in that, and also having a way for them to do a test so that they could see the value in training and then test. So a test would be that they're going to play a tournament and put those pieces together, but also how would they test themselves on their own, challenge themselves or challenge against someone else. So they started to connect the idea that this training was meaningful and it was going to ultimately be tested by something. The hedge fund person who doesn't have that time, there's a prioritization to what's going to have the most meaning. And almost always it's going to be a tee shot. Because it sets scoring in motion. You're gonna have the biggest impact on somebody if you help their tee shot game, because they can play holes. If their tee shot game's not good, everything is a mishmash from there. So I would highlight, okay, does this person have enough time and enough skill to be able to get 12 tee shots somewhat in play? And then the next step is how often and what tees do they play that gets them inside 150, because that's the scoring threshold, basically. So do they have enough skill and correct fitting and all those things to be able to get enough opportunities inside 150? And then if they are practicing some kind of approach shots, almost all of it should be inside 150. For the regular person, it's still shocking to me how often they hit shots outside 150 when they really just don't matter. I mean, as long as you don't accumulate penalty shots, and if they do matter, that means probably they're not playing the right tees. They're playing tees that have too many shots that are outside 150, and then that's a discussion to have.
That's a really fun conversation to have with the student in front of you.
Well, I mean, it's the real. I mean, there is all that's the Trackman data about that and the choices, and you'll start to look at the circle on the Trackman Pro app of what fits and what doesn't. It's when your dispersion gets wider, it just doesn't fit, and I think that Scott Fawcett and that awareness has been very helpful, but it really hasn't trickled down that much to the club golfer. Like, they just don't tend to understand that this is, if you're going to have this big shotgun blast from outside 150, it's just how it is.
I guess a generalized way to put that is if they can't hit it off the tee to inside 150 on a par 4, then they're probably not at the right tee, or their skill's not at a level that's going to allow that to happen.
Yeah, or their scores are going to reflect that. Their scores are going to reflect that. That threshold number is 160 on the tour, or for high level male golfers, but for club golfers, it's inside 150. It's probably, depending on the difficulty of the approach shot, it might even be less than that. It might be inside 140. So, yeah, and then I think if you have that conversation with the right education and the right delivery for that person, hopefully those words resonate or land softly enough that you're not trying to change people's goals or their motivation. You're just trying to make it realistic, backed up by data.
Yeah, I think that's one of the more trickier parts of country club or coaching, is managing that or communicating in a way. And I think some of the information you've shared already is really good to engage with your student and be like, okay, here's the deal. This is what we're looking for. And then if you can do this, if you can hit it inside 150 off the tee, then we can talk about what the goal is that you have in front of you.
Yeah, what the case study that was the most interesting for me was my wife. She doesn't play very often anymore. She's a very difficult client. I very much love my wife, but we're different personalities, and we have this frictional relationship when it came to golf. And my wife is highly competitive and likes beating people. The story was that when Daniel eventually got his PGA Tour card, he had resisted playing Belinda, and she had him 4 down through 10. And he shot 5 under for the remaining holes and never wanted to play her again. And she was, when she played regularly, a solid 14 handicap, and she never wanted to get better than that. And the way she dealt with that was that she never went for greens in regulation. she just chose to always play short. So the most important shot in that scenario was the pitch shot from somewhere around 40 yards, usually 50, 40, 30 yards. She got really good at it. And she also got really good at putting from around 25 feet. So the choice there of the first shot or tee shot, as long as it went out there somewhere, and then the next one, even if it rolled along the ground, as long as it got inside 40, 50 yards, the next most important one was going to be on the green. And then anybody played her realized that she was always putting for birdie. And it was a really good formula for doing that. It just isn't necessarily a sustainable formula for everybody because it always predictably shot those same numbers. And then she was okay with that because she liked beating up on tour players by doing it. So I know that that's predictable. I've used that with other people. The flaw in it is that if you then change your expectations and you want to start breaking 80, that formula is not going to be good for you.
So you brought up, friction and difficult student and your wife as an example. And one of the questions that was brought in from a teacher was, what would be your first step in overcoming the stubborn student, that either make sure that they don't, and this could be experience too, but make sure that they don't take over the lesson or resist the process or stopping it to some degree. Do you have any tools for dismantling?
Wow, that's a tricky one because I think that conversation gets much better when you're more experienced. I don't know how I would have. I wasn't very good at that earlier on in my career. Like you have a dominant person who is successful in other aspects of their life, and I now know because they're insecure and I'm feeling uncomfortable. That's the reason why, more likely, why they're acting that way. Also, what is quite common in my part of the world, and maybe common in your part of the world as well, is that someone will arrive and they will initially start off by telling you all the people that they've seen or all these things that haven't worked, so that they're just kind of setting the stage for this uncomfortable feeling that makes them seem like a closed book. It's where in your head, you're thinking, well, why is this person here? Like, they've just told me they've seen all these other people in the area that I know that are good instructors, and those things didn't work. So they're thinking that I have some different diagnosis or different magic pill that is going to help them. And also, they tend to have this very adversarial type way of communicating. Now, I have this perspective because I know what that feels like. And also now I would have ways to disarm that. But those ways come with my experience and the platform of me doing this for 30 years now. I don't know how I would have had that 5 years into it or even 10 years into it. I think you just recognize, okay, this person's pretty adversarial. I think you get initially be like, okay, why are you not, maybe not in a tone that's also friction, but like, why are you here? Okay, why did you come here today? What is it that I can help you with? And sometimes questions like that are a little more disarming to those people because you're just saying, okay, here to help you. How can I help? And then they maybe have enough perspective to realize, okay, this tone or this how I'm communicating is not that helpful here. Okay, and you're genuine. I don't think it's a good idea to meet that person like head on initially, because that's just going to elevate things. Yeah,
But that kind of goes back to your point about the technology too. It's like go and find some teachers to watch that have been teaching at a facility with clients that might be more, type A, maybe just so to speak, and observe how they deal with it, right? I mean that.
Yeah, I'm also a big fan of filming your own lessons. Okay, and you just have your phone running on a stand and you film the whole thing, and then you go back and look at it, and that can be very powerful. It can also be pretty humbling because you like, wow, okay, I did not sound the way I wanted to there, or the tone that I used in response to that person was not really what I was intending. It's very enlightening to do that. I've found that very helpful to figure out, wow, that tone there was not good, or I gotta stop using that word. That's not a word that I'm wanting to have this person leave with, or the takeaway. And that's the other thing that I got. I am into doing even now. Like, I want to have a summary, and I'm going to ask the person, and I tell them, this isn't a test. This is helpful to me. What is your takeaway from today? What is it that, if we were going to bullet point this and you were going to write this down in a notebook, what is your takeaway? And sometimes it's not at all what you intended. So then you're not going to correct it right there, but it has you modify the next time you see them. It was something that I started doing with all my junior clients. I would do a follow-up call the night after, just calling to get a breakdown. And then I also ask them to write down what they take away, and I want them to read it back to me. And I tell them, this is for me, it's not for you. I want to see what you got from this, and it's helpful for me. And it's that, along with filming your lessons, is very helpful to get an idea of what people are leaving with.
Yeah, that you have like a Pivot Pro or something you use, right? It kind of follows you around as you.
Yeah, it's called Pivo. It's the Pivo is activated, and it once you lock it on your face, it'll follow you around the room. So you don't have to worry about it anymore. It's basically like having a camera person there.
Yeah, you get to double down on watching yourself and learning, and then producing content for social media.
Exactly, correct. And I'm not great at that. Again, I'm fortunate enough. Again, my wife handles my social media, and so that she's coming, like, walking the door. Content. Like, whoa, walk through the door here.
So one of the questions that came through, which might be interesting, is what's the hardest thing you've ever had to do in your job?
Well, the hardest thing that I've ever done was coach Carl Peterson. So when I met Carl, he'd never had a coach before. So this is a player who had won 4 times on the PGA Tour, had responded only to ball flight, and he was very good. And he was in a period where he was not doing as well as he wanted, but never had another voice in his head other than his own. So I was very mindful of that. I was really aware, like, okay, this could go really badly. These doors, opening them up in this person's head. He also had some real idiosyncrasies in not only in his movement, but also in things like putting. I wasn't helping him in putting, but I could just see that this was back before the long putter, and he was consistently one of the best putters statistically on the PGA Tour. And he had a closed stance, open shoulders, very closed putter, and snorted when he putted. So this was a clue as to how this person did this at a very high level. So I took a lot of time, looked at a lot of older movement of what he did when he was younger. There was a period, which is well known, that he lost a bunch of weight quickly, didn't play good, and then he gained it back. There were elements of screening him. There was a whole bunch of looking into his background. He's a very athletic guy. A lot of people don't know that. He played cricket at a high level when he lived in London. He is a good pool player, just these things, like, to try to figure out. And it all got boiled down into him essentially doing one thing. And fortunately, it went well. He won and had one of his best years ever, had a chance to win the PGA at Kiowa against Rory McIlroy, and had won at Harbour Town earlier. And so it was turned out to be a great experience, but it was like, wow, okay, this could go really not well if I felt like you introduce things that, because it was going to play out on a public stage. That's the other thing, it's going to play out, and this person, it's not going to be hidden. It's going to be right there.
Another question, a little unrelated to that, and maybe kind of to it, but how do you manage your your feedback or encouragement in a lesson? You know, when do you feel it's necessary and when do you feel it's not?
Well, this is a question that I'm going to answer more in communication. And one of the things that I try not to do is use words like right or because in my opinion, that tends to be looking for a response from them. And at times they're not necessarily, the client is not ready to give you that response. So if you ask or attach at the end of what you're saying, right, or or obviously, that's another word, like obviously, well, it may not be obvious to the person that's standing there. And by attaching obviously, you're basically making an evaluation of your information is obvious to them and it may not be obvious. Okay. Like you're pointing to a path number up on a screen with a Trackman data and they say, obviously this is going to cut. And they're, whoa, that's not obvious to them. Okay. So you got to be, I think that feedback comes from time spent with that person. You got to recognize when that person comes to you for the first time, even if they're a top 100 player in the world, their guard's down. They feel uncomfortable. They're maybe more familiar with it because they've had more of this experience, but everybody feels uncomfortable. Everybody's coming there somewhat vulnerable. And if they're not, they're putting on a show. That show is that their back's up and they're edgy or that they've got a little extra bravado. So to expect positive feedback initially, I don't think that's going to happen. I think that that's going to be a bonus. Like if you get somebody that's really got a good sense of themselves and they're really gratified, or they're really grateful for what you've given them in that first time. But I think that that's going to happen more down the road because initially they're just uncomfortable.
Yeah, I think that gets overlooked a lot when you're starting out in teaching is how uncomfortable the student is in front of you and then finding ways to help them become comfortable.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because you talk about a lot connecting with the student, knowing why they do things, and that you have to take away that element of being uncomfortable.
The coaching surveys that I've read and the information that I've tried to get from other sports is the feedback from student to about teacher or coach is almost always about how that person made me feel. It's not about the information. It's not about, whether they, gave me, and this isn't just in golf, it's in any sport or even in teachers in schools. It's how that person made them feel. So that hangs over my head a lot when I'm thinking about how am I communicating with this person. And that's where filming comes in helpful because you can look at it yourself and say, how would I have really made that person feel? And maybe you're a style coach that likes to move people around. Okay. Like I know coaches that are that way. Well, if you've been moved around yourself, you maybe would take a different opinion of that. Okay. Maybe it's the same. Maybe there's value in that. But until you've experienced yourself and you get that perception, and you got to be careful with that kind of thing nowadays, whether it's with juniors or men with women. I mean, you got to be really cautious and you're like jamming and moving people around aggressively. And if you've had that happen to you and you didn't like it, you got to be aware of that yourself. So I think you get better at understanding that this is a person who, when they walk in there, is going, just again, I think my reference to doctors, none of us feel good going to the doctor. I have a pretty good relationship with my GP, but I still don't feel real good going in there. Like, or going to the dentist or anything like that. It's your guard's down.
So if we were going to summarize the title that we did today, which was how to get the most out of your player, what would be 2 or 3, maybe 4 things you have that you would leave the audience with?
Build a relationship. Think of building a relationship first. Get real measured, whether it's data or movement or some reference point for whether their goals align with what's possible. Get someone to buy into a plan or some kind of direction over time, so then it doesn't lead to what seems to be almost inevitable, which is wavering back and forth and searching all the time. And get people thinking about what the clarity of intent is. Like what is the intent when someone is either doing this drill or this exercise, or when they're going to play golf? What's the intent? How clear is this intent? If you're going to gain speed, you want to gain speed, then what comes with that is going to be probably inaccuracy. And we can now measure that you got faster, but it doesn't mean that it's also going to be faster and better. So that clarity of intent is important.
That's awesome, Jeff. Thank you so much. I don't think we have any more questions coming in, but I had a really nice time chatting with you. And
yeah, it was good seeing you.
The summary was awesome. I really appreciate that.
You're welcome. Well, I feel like I got to do that. I mean, I'm asking it from people that come to see me, so I feel like I got to be able to do it as well. So
awesome. Great takeaways, Jeff. Thank you so much.
Okay. Well, take care, because I'm happy to be here.
Thank you, Jeff. Thanks, Sarah.
Welcome.
Thank you.
And then Jeff, they can contact you through like Instagram. You know, following you on Instagram is probably a pretty good place to get some content from you.
Yeah, and then if you want to reach out to me directly through direct message on Instagram or through my website, that's fine too. It's not many people go to websites anymore, but Instagram. And I said that my wife handles that, but I review the Instagram account every night, so it is me putting the content and answering the messages.
It's a good follow, and we have it in the MAPGA, I think, story, and then in my story and Jeff's as well, just to grab a follow on his Instagram. Good content, good phrases, and life lessons in there as well. So thanks, Jeff.
You're welcome. Thanks.